everyone, welcome back to the Life Unpotted. This is Sophie here.
And this is Daisy.
Thanks for joining us for another episode. Just a few quick things before I get into the episode. Last week we had our second community Zoom session. It was awesome to meet more people from the community. I think we had a total of 8 people this time. Met a lot of new faces, which was so cool to kind of continue the conversation we talk about on the podcast offline in a new setting, in an informal setting, to get to know you guys, to connect, for you to get to know us. And we're going to keep doing this every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. We know we have a lot of listeners who don't live in the U.S., so we're going to try and accommodate that by hosting these Zooms throughout the day, different time zones, as we evolve, as we grow, as Life Unpotted turns and blossoms into the beautiful community that it really is turning into. And we are so surprised, honestly, pleasantly surprised of how many people are reaching out to us, saying that they resonate so much with the topics they talk about, how it's helping them throughout their journey. And it really is a collective journey that we're going through together, because as we're helping you guys, we also are learning. You know, we start a lot of these episodes, honestly, sometimes we don't feel great, and we end up the episode and we're like, oh wow, we just realized a lot. So you're experiencing realizations in real time, and I think that's what makes this so special. We don't plan, we don't really talk about anything in advance. We just sit down, we're real, we're present, we come in with intention, take a deep breath, and we just say, what's on our mind today? So we hope that we can kind of have that same impact for you as you're going on your day, to kind of pause and stop and ask yourself, what is on your mind today? So yeah, community Zooms every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern for now. Check out our Instagram for more information. And one more thing before we get into today's episode. If you haven't already, please take the time to rate our podcast. Give it as many stars as you deem appropriate. Comment on it, leave a review. This really, really helps us as we're growing, as we're building this community, because we want to keep giving you guys quality content. And this is an evolving journey. So your support means so much to us, and it literally helps us so much. So thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate your support. So let's get into today's episode. There's so many different ways to talk about the journey that we're going through right now. Some people call it a spiritual awakening. Some people call it connecting with themselves. Some people call it healing. I think there's not really one word to use, but for the purposes of this conversation, I think the word we're going to choose to use is awakening, is becoming aware. There feels to be a spiritual undertone for the way that we're experiencing, but spirituality is new to us too. So it's a word that we're learning what it really means. So on that note, on this journey of waking up and going through the process of healing and questioning our beliefs and the foundation of our belief system from the time that we were born to where we are today, it is a very complicated process, because I think we go in and out of it, right? We have moments where we have that clarity and we have that sense of everything makes sense right now. I feel good. I feel connected. I feel like I've released. And then before you know it, it might be literally an hour before we find ourselves again back into our mind. And I'm really recognizing that this process of going back and forth between the present moment, between having a sense of awareness, and then falling back into the mind, into our thoughts, into fear, into anxiety, is one that you start to understand it better as it's happening, the more you become aware of it. So I think what we want to talk about in today's episode is kind of that back and forth of what it looks like to feel like you're aware and then the next day fall back into the trap of the mind. I think that's all I got for the intro, Daisy. What do you think about that?
So I think that coming in and out of this experience of becoming more aware and slowly falling back into your old patterns it's difficult, because you're experiencing all the things that you used to experience and the things that you used to do to alleviate your pain and your suffering. Now you're aware that, oh, that's actually not going to help me, and it's not going to make me feel better. So you're stuck between, and this is my experience, like you can be so stuck between having like the most clarity, the biggest day of your life where you feel like everything is so clear. And then, the next day you're feeling like your body hurts, you're feeling tired, you're feeling like nothing makes sense, like you don't know where you're at in your life. And you want to look towards those old habits that used to make sense for you, that used to make you feel better. And now you look at those things and you might try to use those old habits that make you feel better, but you have the awareness that it's not going to make you feel better, it's going to make you feel worse. So it's in that moment you have to realize, what am I going to change? And I think there can be that in-between moment of, I know I have to change this habit, but implementing it is really hard because I don't feel great. So in a way, it's kind of like you're just sitting with this discomfort, and you want to be reactive, but maybe that doesn't make sense for you anymore. Maybe that's something that you've moved past. So it can be a weird place where nothing really makes sense. If you can't tell, like, by my energy, like, I'm in a very judgmental state right now of everything, of the way my life looks, the way it's going. And that's just honest. Like, but I mean, I'm sure that'll be different in 2 days, but right now it's like when the judgment just like takes over, it's just like, it's hard to do something like this, honestly.
Do you feel like you're resisting that? Like, it was hard for you to start podcasting today?
Yeah, because I think a safety measure when you're going through things is that you want to conceal yourself. You want to shut that part off of you and just go into a different state. When in reality, going back into that state and getting reacquainted with it is what makes you feel better. But there's also the component of, I'm not super comfortable doing that because then I'm going to have to feel all these things. So either that resonates with you or you're like, what the hell did she just say? But I think it's a weird experience because you don't, and like, I'm judging myself. I hate this right now. Honestly, I don't like it. And I think that's just, I guess, the reality of this is because you can see 1 week to the next how different things can look. And it's not to judge that this time is going to be forever, because this is just a momentary glimpse into what is happening now. And that will change. And that's, I think, what we have to do is not cling on to that my life is now going to feel this way forever. It's just a moment in time. And there's really nothing to do about that.
You said a lot of things there, because I think it is just a moment in time. That's all this ever is. Like, these feelings come back and they arise, and it feels like confusing because it's like, why am I feeling this again? Why do I feel so shitty and blah and anxious, and I don't trust anything that's happening and judgmental? And I think we almost forget how many times before we felt those feelings. Like, Daisy, I just take the example of you right now. It's like you're going through all these feelings right now, and it's like, I know for a fact that you have felt these feelings on multiple occasions, as have I. But when we go through these feelings, it almost feels like the first time that we're going through them. And I think that matters because we almost lose sense. We do start to blow these feelings out of proportion to think that my life is going to be exactly how I'm feeling right now. My life is going to be this judgmental blob that feels like shit. When in reality, I can concretely say that you will feel better maybe in a few hours. So
if not already, that's the thing. It's like,
if not already.
I think that's why I think it's so interesting about podcasting and why we like it so much is because we had a guest on last week. So we haven't podcasted for like almost 2 weeks. And I feel a huge difference in my life because all of these things that we're learning, all of these things that we're trying to change in our lives, the podcast is truly a place for us to show up fully and embody it. And having that weekly or even twice a week, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but I can't think of one. But it's like any other habit. It's like any other thing. It's a place for us to be able to fully embody these things. And it's like a relief. It's like a therapy, but for your soul. It's a therapy for like being able to let go and stop resisting. Those are really the two things. I think it comes back to resistance. That's what it is.
It always comes back to resistance, right? And I think when you start to build a momentum in what you're doing, like for example, when we podcast every week or twice a week, we're like, we got this. Let's get the studio set up. Let's get the mic. By studio, I mean like the plants we put around in our apartment. It's not a real studio yet, but let's get our lighting up. Let's get the computer out. We're going, because you know what happens when you're in momentum? You're not in your mind.
Right.
And I think what happens when you take a break from something and you're not doing it consistently, you switch out of being in your body and being in this quote unquote flow state, and you fall back into the mind. And what happens when we fall back into the mind? Suffering. I can't do it. I'm not good enough. I don't know how to talk. I don't know how to podcast. People are not going to like me. I don't even have anything valuable to say. How come we never think those things when we're going through things with momentum? Because we don't fall back into the mind. Whenever we're experiencing these feelings like through our thoughts, it's so easy to forget that our thoughts do not reflect reality.
They don't. Like I woke up this morning And I felt different in the past few days. I felt like, okay, I know that I need to do, 10 minutes of yoga so I can just stretch. I know I'm being disconnected from my body. I know I'm drinking too much caffeine. I know all of these things are what are further perpetuating this resistance to allowing me to just show up as I am. And actually, once I show up as I am, it allows me to reconnect and actually take care of myself in the way that I need. And that process can be uncomfortable. But one of the things I was doing was I was journaling, because I'm like, what the hell is in my mind? All of these things, I'm so unaware. There's so much in my mind. I realize I'm over identifying with my mind right now. And then I opened up the book, New Earth, and literally, of course, I'm like reading it off and on. I probably haven't opened it for a few weeks, but it was like, it literally started talking about over identification of the mind. So it's like, I started journaling about this and then I opened up the book and it was about that. So it's like just interesting how I found that. But going back to it, if you're not new here, you know that I talk about coffee a lot because I'm always looking for cues in my life of what means this. What is showing up in my life? What is manifesting in my life that is really a reflection of what's going on in my mind and what's making my choices for me. And that one is coffee. I'm just gonna this is what I always talk about. Like the past probably week, I've been waking up, having breakfast, and then immediately I'm like, okay, time for coffee. And what coffee reflects to me in those moments is that what my body needs is to stretch. It is to relax. It is to not be given a substance that's going to further put me back in the mind. Because I think with this is not a hit on coffee. I freaking love coffee, but this is more
We're huge coffee supporters here. I think this is really an example of recognizing tendencies that you do. This could be waking up and being like, I'm going to go, I don't know, eat a chocolate bar or something that you think that.
Well, it's an old habit that when I was super unaware that I would just cling to because it was, you know what it was? I realized food is a big one with this. It's like when it comes to the ego, it's never satiated. And that's what coffee was for me. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to have coffee. Okay, so what's next? Am I going to get a pastry? Am I going to go do this?
It's the wanting mind. It's the wanting mind.
And it's like the never ending cycle. It's the hedonic treadmill. Like that's what it's really representing for me. And instead of being like, you know what? How about I don't try to make myself feel better? How about I go outside for a walk and watch the chipmunks? And like that's what makes me feel good. That is just, for me, that is an example of, okay, shifting out of that. Recognizing that was what helped me realize you're living too much in the mind. Get out of the mind and get back into the body. And it's such a weird thing because I'm aware of it. Yesterday, I was telling you this, but I hadn't fully processed it. I was kind of like unsure of where I was. And I am feeling super reactionary and feeling all of these things. But when you're aware of it, you have to say, okay, I guess I'm just going to feel really shitty right now. I guess I'm just going to allow these things to happen. And that's just part of it. Because eventually if I don't feed these like angry things of like, I'm mad because the dishwasher is on and it keeps beeping. It's like, okay, accept it. And I think it's really easy to see these little things in your life that start with, I'm feeling angry. This person cut me off. I'm so annoyed. I'm going to like make a noise or I'm going to push them or like, it's so easy for that to continue in your life where you start to notice little things where there is a noise or there is a light or there is someone who is breathing really loud on the train. And I think it's so easy to keep feeding that. But I think the only way to stop it is to say, hey, maybe what's going on in their life to break. Why is this bothering? What is this trigger? Why is this triggering me so bad? And it's not going to make you feel better right away, but I'm really just giving advice to myself. And that's all I ever do on this podcast is let my subconscious talk.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So when you're going through these experiences where you start to recognize that, okay, I am starting to feel pissed off. I'm starting to feel like the dishwasher's beeping and I feel annoyed. I'm feeling reactionary. In that moment, do you find the space or do you have the space to think in that moment and think, I'm upset? Or have you felt like the past 2 days that space didn't exist and all you knew was that there's a bunch of external environment stimuli that are bothering me. I need to get away from those stimuli. Where did you fall in between those two? Of feeling like, oh, this means something's up with me. This means I'm going through something. This means I need to take some time to pause, to breathe, versus I'm annoyed. So let me try to remove myself from the situation. Like, where did you fall in between those two?
Definitely closer to the first. Of not allowing myself to go too deep into it, of being like questioning it in my head and expressing the concerns without emotion attached to it. So that doesn't mean like having like a split reaction in a minute and then being like, okay, I need to rein it in. So I think it's being aware that when you feed into it, that is what allows it to grow. So that's, I would say that's where I was.
I think that is just the answer to this entire question about reactivity is the more you feed into the emotion that arises, the more we feed into, I'm feeling really angry, so I'm going to get angry, and then I'm going to get angry again, and it's going to build and build and build, instead of, I feel angry, and okay, I'm going to pause, I'm going to accept it, I'm going to see it, I'm going to try to separate myself from it. Anger is the hardest one to do.
It is.
There are so many moments where it's like rage comes up in my body. Like I experience rage of like, I am so angry right now. So I think it's interesting on this scale of building this awareness and building this understanding that we aren't our thoughts and we are not our emotions and we are the observer of them. There are times in which the emotions feel like, oh, I feel like I'm worried about my career. I can be like, okay, I understand that is a long-term thing. I don't need to focus on that. I can separate myself from that future fear. I don't need to worry about that. Versus, I'm stuck in the subway and I have to get there and I'm feeling really frustrated. And it's like in these moments, I become the anger. I become so consumed by the emotion that space is not available for me to see. It's not available for me to recognize, oh, wait, I am not the anger. I am just experiencing the anger, but because in those moments, like the anger grows so much to the point where it takes over your whole body, you don't really, it's more difficult to find that space to say, wait, this is not true about me. Like I don't have to be angry right now. But that I think is like the hardest thing ever. Truly.
So a couple of thoughts I just had. That is why if you're in that state, it's so hard to try something new. Like when we started podcasting, that's why we would struggle so much. We would get so mad at each other and it was all life or death and all the anger would come up because the reality is if like when we podcast, we've created this space where it's like you have to be vulnerable. And like I could kind of almost look back and see like the layers. Like sometimes like we were like pushing and pulling of like, I don't want to pull that layer back yet. But that's kind of what you have to do when we're podcasting is you have to pull it back. And I think that what Podcasting Weekly has really helped me with is that getting in a consecutive momentum that is like, okay, you're going to do this. So sit back and let go.
You can't expect to feel good before you try. I think there's a huge misconception in our minds that we're going to have to feel our mental state has to precede the event that we want to do. So I have to feel good to start podcasting. When in reality, podcasting will make me feel good. So I think when we're always waiting for this certain of emotion to come up, like I need to feel good to do this, we're going to be waiting for our whole life because those emotions won't arise in that moment because we're still in a state of resistance. And the only way for those emotions to arise is when we get out of our head, but you're not going to be able to get out of your head before you start doing the thing. You have to do the thing to get out of your damn head. It's like, think about how many times you go to the gym and halfway through, I'm like, I'm flying right now, man. Like, I'm feeling good. And it's like, well, about 20 minutes ago I was in my apartment thinking about how awful it's going to feel. Well, why does it feel good now? Why couldn't I feel good when I was sitting in the apartment getting my gym clothes on? Because I was still in the mind. I was still existing up here. When we're existing up here in the rational, logical, fear-based, evolutionary mind, we're not going to be able to experience the emotions that come with the flow state that are not a byproduct of the mind. They are a byproduct of the experience that we're in, which is happening by relaxation. That is not something we do logically. I don't think relaxation is something we do logically. And I think through this process, I think it's something so interesting that I'm realizing is that a lot of this experience is not one we can talk about. In the sense, it's not a concept. It's not an idea. I cannot explain to you before I'm podcasting how to get myself into that. I can't explain how to get myself into that state because that is not a state that you can explain. It's something that you have to just do. The tongue can't bite the tongue. The fire can't burn the fire, right? It's the whole idea of when you're trying to do something for too long, the knower can't know itself. So you can't try to have emotion precede the event you're trying to do. You have to just you have to start jumping to the pool and start swimming. And when you start swimming and you're swimming in there, you're going to realize, oh wait, I'm a much better swimmer than I thought.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah, that you did. So that's really interesting to look at your life or look at your schedule or look at your day-to-day activities of what you're doing and do an audit of how much of these activities require me to be in the mind. And I think a lot. I think when you're working a full-time job, 9 to 5, 9 to 6, full-time job, that you are fully in the mind. Not always, but if we're thinking corporate, thinking sales, like, of course you're going to be in the mind. And I think it's like so important. It is so important to do activities that get you out of the mind. But I don't think that is something that, of course, like in school or in college, like we're really taught to do. We have to learn to become workers and support ourselves by making someone else money. And that becomes our entire lives, our entire personalities. And there's so much more. And I think people are waking up to this of there's so much more we should just be doing for ourselves, whether that's just taking yourself to a pottery class for the sake of having fun or a sketching class, that's one end of it, or starting to ride horses or ride bikes. Like, think of all these things that are just like, there's no purpose, there's no outcome. I think it's doing things where there is no outcome from what you're doing so you can actually enjoy the moment you're doing it in, because that's where you're allowing yourself to get out of your mind. And in that way, you get a relief from what's happening in your mind. If you're over-identifying with all the fear and all the anxieties of the future or all the depression from the past, then you're never going to be in a happy place. And I mean, of course, yes, you can just decide, I'm no longer going to be in the body, but that takes practice. I mean, you can just decide I'm no longer going to be in my mind, but that takes practice. Like, you don't need to do anything. Like, you can just be like, okay, I'm just going to let go. And you can. You don't have to go and do anything. But I think when you're getting into it in the beginning aspect of it, it might be easier to go through an activity to get started into the flow of things.
I have a few things I want to say. First, just for the listeners, I guess when we're saying don't be in the mind, it makes me think of two things. It makes me think of when you're meditating, of just gaining the awareness of what's happening instead of reacting to it. So if you're meditating and you start having these thoughts about what am I going to do tomorrow, what am I going to eat for lunch, you just say, you just observe them. You say, okay, that is arising right now. I'm like experiencing that, instead of saying, going down the chain of what am I going to eat for lunch and worrying and worrying and worrying. On the other hand, I think not being in the mind is simply just doing, just moving forward. I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to start walking. I'm going to put one foot after the other without looking at my feet and analyzing, am I walking? You're just going to walk, right? When we walk, we don't think about walking, we just do it. So I think that's important to note. Like, what is it, like getting out of the mind? I think, what does that look like, right? And I also think like exactly what you said, Daisy. It's like when we're doing something solely for an outcome and we're doing something to get you somewhere. I'm driving to the job so I can get the money to go to the next place to buy the thing for the vacation. We're always doing something for a means to an end. And I was having a conversation with our friend Ray yesterday, and I was talking about how I absolutely love podcasting. It is right now our full-time job. It is what we're aiming to be our trajectory in our life. And I was talking about when we're podcasting, even when I'm editing, even when I'm doing all the things with it, yes, of course, there's days where it absolutely is frustrating, but I'm able to find enjoyment in the process of talking. Right now, the conversation we're having, I'm not thinking about editing it. I'm not thinking about any of the steps that come after. I'm just thinking about engaging with you, Daisy, the co-host of Life Unpotted, in this conversation. So, of course, we're able to relax because we're not doing something for a means to an end. We're doing something for the purpose of doing it. And I just think that it is really hard in life to find things that we're able to do simply for the act of doing it. I'm going to go for a walk just to go for a walk, just to enjoy it. And when you're mentioning with the job, and I think with the job, it's really hard because when you're working in a job that you're just doing to get paid, that doesn't mean that you can't still find that rhythm of just doing it. Say you work at a cafe. I'm going to, every single day today, I'm really going to enjoy every single interaction I have with that other human being that walks in for no other reason of we're sharing on this earth together, and let me say hi to them and let me interact with them. Yes, I know I'm so scared about the future, but if I can just get myself out of the rational thinking mind and come back into the moment, my job will start feeling a lot better. Oh, let me think about the ways, I'm learning from this. So I guess, I don't know if this is clear, but I guess it's like so much of our suffering comes when we're trying to get an outcome out of what we're doing instead of just doing it. And I think that is like the most abstract, art, confusing, nuanced topic of how do you do something without doing it? Because the second you start thinking about it, you're all of a sudden thinking again. Alan Watts talks about this a lot, but I think it's kind of the root of all our suffering.
Well, I think it's kind of an idea of taking this with a grain of salt. If you have all these worries and if you have all these concerns, recognize no matter what you do today, it's not going to have a huge impact on the outcome of your life. Unless you do go and do something absolutely insane or absolutely crazy, an isolated day alone is not going to solve the rest of your life. So stop treating each moment like there is the urgency and the expectation that it is going to fix everything. And maybe just realize, and I mean, I think the other way to look at it too is, yes, every single moment are the moments that shape up your life of what the outcome is. But what if you're never enjoying any of those moments? What if you can let go of the expectation? And the reason I said it the first way of letting go of the expectation is to realize nothing you do in this isolated day alone is really going to impact your life that much. And I say that to take the pressure off, because there is no pressure on what you do today. Just focus on the one task. But I think what's easy is to get caught up as like, oh, one part of the brain gets hooked in this task, and now I'm thinking about and concerned about this other task that I have to do, and then that task I start working on it, and I'm worried about this other thing in my life. And it's like, how do you break that consistent worrying cycle? And I think it has to be of pausing, realizing whatever the anxiety is around these tasks are way less important than what I'm projecting onto it, because it's something that's in the mind. It's something that is going to be not to do with the one little task. It's something much deeper. It's always something deeper. It's always the thread. Keep pulling the thread of how much deeper is it. And that's why it's like taking a pause. And that's why like meditating in the afternoon or whenever is so helpful, because you, like you said, with meditating, you have those passing thoughts and you're like, oh, okay. I'm going to sit here in silence. I'm going to have these thoughts, but okay, I have them. And that can totally shift the rest of your day, because you realize all of this stress and all of this anxiety and all this fear you were having, you were just projecting onto your day-to-day things that were taking out the enjoyment of them. And how you don't have to do that. Something so simple can really help get you out of your mind and get you out of your over analytical brain that always wants to have an answer and a solution, and getting more into the body, because we create our own prisons.
And I think in those moments it's almost like, oh, nothing's wrong. Like nothing's wrong right now.
And that can be triggering. If nothing is wrong and someone says that, it can be
it's the most triggering thing. Like
so annoying. The
other day I was like feeling irritated. You're like, why don't you just pause? I'm like, that's literally the most annoying thing to ever hear when you're in a reactionary state. But I'm taking a meditation course right now at this place called 3 Jewels in New York City. And I think we had our second week last week. And she was painting the example of how meditation is all about becoming aware of the shortcuts and the biases that we use to navigate throughout our lives, right? Everything we do, it's like we're forming an opinion about how it's happening instead of letting it happen. And I thought it was really interesting when we're talking about in meditation, in the course, she's using the classic like pen example. If you're holding up a pen, right, you perceive it as a pen because you've been taught your whole life that it is a pen. If a dog comes into the room and the dog perceives a pen, the dog's going to start salivating, because to a dog, it looks like it could eat the pen. So in reality, in legitimate reality, in the sense of the universal experience happening right now without our subjective experiences experiencing it. So if the pen is just holding it there, right? Is the pen anything? What is the pen? How could we argue that the pen is anything if we're not there experiencing it? So I think the point of this example is that reality is empty of meaning. I'm looking at this plant right now. Okay, it's green and it has leaves, and I'm like, okay, that's a plant, but that is a plant because I was learned that was a plant. This obviously is a more philosophical, nuanced topic about everything is empty in the universe, except for the meaning we prescribe it. But it can't be taken down to a smaller scale to recognize that you are creating your own suffering. You are perpetuating your own suffering. And we get so convinced that we're not creating our own suffering. That is my girlfriend causing it, or is the stove going off causing it, or it's the sounds I hear in the street, or it's my boss, or if it's my sister, or if it's my mom, or if it's a job I didn't get, or it's a job I want to get. It's none of that.
So I think that's something that just came up is when we had Cam Rosen on, he was like, when I feel myself getting too serious and there's like one bad thing after another, one little bad thing after another happens throughout the day. It's like, they keep happening and you just kind of have to like laugh at it and laugh at yourself for getting so mad about it or getting upset. Like, it's like, okay, like like it's actually funny that I'm getting mad that like your socks are a certain color. Like, I don't know, like little things that don't make any sense. It's kind of like really questioning it and being like, okay.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not taking it so serious.
It's not that serious. Like, we get so caught up in the illusion of it all, thinking that life is this thing we have to figure out, right? And we assume we're going to live to a certain age. We assume that life is going to happen in a certain way. But we don't realize that we have no freaking idea what's going to happen. We have no idea what's going to happen. And life is unfolding through every second. Your entire life could change in 3 hours. That thing that you're subconsciously worried about could turn out a lot better than you think. So if we're always judging life as it's unfolding in the very moment, we're not really giving life a chance to work out for us. And I had a crazy realization today when I was walking along the West Side Highway in the morning where I was like, when have I ever lived in a consistent state of believing that things were going to work out? When have I ever in my entire life spent, let's just say a full week, a month of every single day I'm going to believe? When have I ever done that? Probably never. Oh, of course my reality is looking the way it has been. Because I have been every day full of fear, of worry, of not believing that my life could be in the way I wanted to believe. And what I'm realizing now is that, of course, I am planting those seeds in my life because those thoughts implicate the actions I do. But if I get up and I believe that one day I can have this life I want to have, that belief will completely shift my actions. So it's like, of course, if we're always thinking things are shitty, if we're always thinking that looking at the bad, and we're talking about in meditation, I think as meditation that like you could have a million things happening in your life, 98% of your life can be good. Our negativity brain will highlight the 2% that isn't. We will always highlight that 2% that isn't. So I think it's shifting our mind and awareness to recognize that your life might be working out a lot better than you actually think it is. But you have to allow yourself to see that.
So I'm wondering, you have to recognize like you're not always going to feel great. And when you aren't feeling great, that doesn't necessarily mean that your life's going to be bad. I think sometimes you have to carve out space for yourself to not feel good and just be okay with that. Like right now, like I feel like absolute shit. I don't feel good at all. But what I'm actively working on is being like, yeah, it's my trigger when when Sophie keeps talking and I want to talk because I feel like I've been silenced my entire life. So it's like, okay, instead of me like being like getting like so angry of like, okay, when is she gonna stop talking? It's like all this anger I'm having, it's like just letting it be and fill up my body versus reacting from it. I think it's a place of like, you kind of have to feel that's the definition of like feeling it. Like you have to feel it entirely and fully, and I think that's like looking directly at it. And I think it's confusing how that can just randomly come out of nowhere at times. And I think it's because we have to continue to, we try to keep pushing it away by, like I said, like going on the hedonic treadmill of chasing one high after another. But I think the reality is that like, yeah, it's going to trigger me and it's not going to make me feel good. And I'm not going to react to it. And I'm going to feel it in every crevice of my body. It's painful. But that's better than me reacting and putting it out into the world and then receiving it back. It's like you have to carve out space where you just know you're not going to feel good at times. And I think that I know that is okay because life isn't meant to always feel good. You have to look at the ugly and feel the ugly. You have to continue to experience it over and over and over again until it becomes so small that it's not a big deal.
You have to decide that you're going to break the reactionary cycle. And I think that is something that is very uncomfortable because we're not used to feeling the feelings. You know, we don't learn ever at any age that, okay, from the age of 4, whatever the age number is, your whole life is basically ingrained in your brain. And now you're 28, 29, 30, 40, and you have to go through and now feel the feelings that come up and arise from your whole life. I think it's so important to recognize in this journey. I think we just shifted over to the healing sense of like, these are years of pain. These are years and years of experience that when you were 24 years old and you were crying at your friend's birthday party, it probably was never about the birthday party. It probably was about the way that you got treated in school when you were 10. For me, it was about feeling like, oh, maybe I did get bullied when I was 13. We were never really told that it was our younger years experiences that were never healed, that we never looked at, that are implicating our day-to-day lives. And I think this healing journey is very complicated because on one hand, there are days where you have done all this work and you have been, you know, going through a therapist or crying and working through these things, and you kind of just want to not have a day of dealing with that shit. So I think in those days, it's kind of like, okay, look, I'm giving myself compassion. I'm giving myself an understanding of I am figuring shit out right now, and I don't need to have the answer right away. Like, I don't need to know exactly right away of what this feelings mean, because that might be a lifelong journey of figuring it out. And let's just say you do live till 98 years old and you look back on your life. I doubt you'll look back on this day, this one specific day, and say, that day sucked. You'll see it from a broader view. You'll see it the way when you're landing in a plane and you see the entire city and all the buildings and go, wow, I've never looked at the city that way. Because I was living my life only on one floor in one building and thinking that that would be my whole life. We won't always feel shitty. It's not possible to always feel shitty. But the most important part about it all is letting ourselves feel shitty. Because that's not bad, and that doesn't mean that your whole life is going to be bad. That just means that you're feeling and experiencing feelings that have been suppressed your entire life. And it's just part of the process. And the less we resist it, the more that we let ourselves feel it, the faster the whole process goes. Because it's so simple and sometimes to just say, oh, wait, I know exactly why I'm upset. And I've tried so hard to pinpoint it to everything externally, but it's just this one reason. And when you finally say it, it's like the relief comes. Because it's like, okay, I have permission to let go. And you are the only person that could have given yourself that permission to let go.
I just simultaneously listened to that as a listener while also being on the podcast.
Right, what was your review?
I felt it. I felt seen by it because no one's immune to this. It's an experience.
Yeah.
But I think you kind of painted the picture so clearly. It made me think of all the years where I would just be so upset and I had no idea. I had no idea why I was upset. And when you're young, it's like, yeah, you just want to go have fun. You just want to go party. You just want to like put it behind you. But this will only come up and bubble up even more intensely. And I think with things like drinking and partying, it can become a trap when you're not super conscious about it or intentional about it, that it becomes your world and you're actually never feeling good only when you're partying, but then you're actually not even feeling good when you do that. So I was just reflecting on there was always something wrong, and it was because I was not aware of this. And I think it can be scary to become aware of things, but it also gives you the power to take your life back to where you can intentionally do these things like party, but you know when not to. You know when you should not be drinking. You know when you should not be using substances because you know you're in a fragile state and you know that's not what your body needs right now and you need to take care of yourself. And that's not your entire life. That's just like, that could be a week out of a year. That could be a few days out of a month. Like
that is less than like 2% of your entire life.
Yeah. And I think that can be really scary, especially like when you're like young and like all of your friends are doing this and it's much more a realm of groupthink of like needing your friends to survive and needing my friends to feel fit in. It's so much more difficult when you're young to pop the bubble of say, I'm actually going to listen to myself instead of, being with all of my friends who are doing these things I know I shouldn't do, I think it's more difficult then to be aware of how you're feeling, because you feel like you need your friends more than you need yourself. But I think the more you're able to stand up and show up for yourself in the way that you need, the shorter those periods will last, and you'll allow yourself to work through it, because all you really have to do is work through it and accept it, and no longer be living in that state of rage or anger. And like, I think I just worked through it. I don't know. I think it can be through processing, and this is where it's like, you have to learn the tools of what it looks like to work through things, I think. Right. Whereas if like 5 years ago, like this would have been like a month-long thing for me.
Wow. And now is an hour, I guess, or less. But I think so beautifully you said it is taking the power. It's like taking the power back from the thoughts and emotions that controlled your whole life, your entire life. And now it's like, it's not going to be the case anymore.
Well, that's where awareness comes in. And I think when you are aware to an extent of like, how'd I get here? What is this? Those are really scary questions, but they're also what relieve you of your suffering of, why do I feel so angry? Why am I so upset? Because it becomes more clear, and those questions start to become bigger. And those are scary questions, but the more clear they come, the more clear they are, the more you can see your personal life more clearly and be separated from, this is not that big of a deal. I can just work through this. It's not the end of the world if I cancel on this concert and I don't go. Like, if it means taking care of myself, like, and how's it going to impact me in the next few weeks? Like, these are all things that they're connected. They're totally connected. It all comes back to like the core anxiety. Everyone has like a core thing I feel like that they have to work through. And there's also the core of idea of like our existence. And I think it's really important to work through those things together of like, what hurt me? What is this pain? Why am I doing this? And then simultaneously, like, why do I exist? How am I here? That's really scary. That can be like dismounting, but it can also be a relief to all of this pain that you're suffering in this human body. Like, cause it can help balance of like, you can kind of teeter totter in between the two of realizing, that's really scary, but oh, that's so scary that why does this even matter? Why does this pain even matter?
It's like a balancing the question of asking yourself, not what's wrong with me, but what happened to me. And then going from there and understanding that to then also understanding that this fear of death, this fear of dying, this fear of existential crisis pervades our life in moments we don't even realize. Well, maybe that could have been contributed why you didn't feel good. You don't even realize it because that is the question that exists in all moments of time. Like, what's going on here?
Right.
Like, it's like, but we forget about it.
Well, this is where I'm like plugging all of the guests we've ever had on our podcast. Our Victoria, the Daily Victorian, she was like, I think if everyone woke up and did a death meditation, their lives would change.
Well, yeah.
Because you're confronting the biggest fear of all. I think
Cam said that too. Like,
really?
Cam, okay. Yeah, Cam was like, I think the only thing if we weren't scared to die, then we wouldn't be scared to live.
Right.
So it all comes back to death in some crazy, weird way.
Well, death puts it all in perspective.
We're always going to end every conversation with this.
Well, this is what always makes me feel better. Because it like makes me realize how little my life is.
And I just want to very, very quick excerpt of like, my grandma passed away a few months ago. And I remember being at the services of being like, I was not in the mind. I was the most emotional feeling body I've ever felt in a few months. And it's like, everything made sense in that moment of like, oh my God, what am I worrying about? So I think it is really just, it's about like talking about it to friends, calling up a friend and saying, hey, do you have some time to chat? Writing in your journal, doing in ways to express and to release. I think no matter what your mechanism is, I'm recognizing that for us, that is a podcast. It is a form of releasing, of talking, of comprehending the things we're going through. Finding that medium for you of what that looks like of releasing. Because I think once we release, we always will feel better in whatever sort that looks like.
Yeah, but I feel like it's just multifaceted.
It is so there's no answer. There's no answer.
We're
never
answer.
If you're looking at this podcast for an answer, we'll never have one.
There's never an answer.
There's never an answer.
These are just our experiences. And I think that it can just be helpful to hear others' experiences.
For sure.
So to tie it up, it's always important to be aware of your habits, because I think that always leads you back to what is the condition of your mind, whether that is how does my room look, or have I looked at my banking account, have I completed Venmos. I think it's like these
avoidance. Like, am I avoiding things?
Right. Am I avoiding these little things in my life? What does that mean? Am I avoiding these larger questions and these larger fears? Am I harboring these emotions and pains that I'm too afraid to look at? I think there's a clear line that is drawn from what your day-to-day life looks like to what's happening in your mind. So I think it can be easier to start there of like, what is that one thing I'm avoiding? And sometimes just doing that one thing, like completing Venmos, is going to lift a weight off you and help you look at other parts of yourself that would be hard to see if you didn't do those little tasks. Does that make sense?
Totally, because if fear builds and it builds to the point where like, well, I have scarcity mindset about my finances, I'm not going to look at my Venmos. Well, that goes down to the fear of your core of your existence. They're all connected. So
right,
just about looking at the fear, and then you'll realize the fear will unravel. It always does.
So on that note,
thank you for listening, guys. This
honestly felt like a really vulnerable episode because I didn't really show up, I feel like, in a way that was in a good place. But I think that sometimes it's just important. I feel like sometimes those can be the most impactful conversations to hear.
Well, it's honest. No one's immune from the human experience, no matter who you are, or what podcast you have, or if you're top whatever. No one's immune from the emotions.
No, they're not. And I think it can be uncomfortable for like us to release. But I am just going to recognize that it could help someone. And this is just a moment in my life. Like, this is just part of the human experience. So that is what I will sign off with, is that if you are in a crap place, like, just know that it will end. I think when you are able to connect with someone who is also going through that and see that it's not just you, kind of like recognizing that your existence is so much bigger than just this life, it really helps you move through those uncomfortable emotions. So I hope that's what this can stand for, if nothing else.
Beautifully said, Daisy. I agree. Thank you guys so much for listening. Just a reminder again, we'll be having our next community Zoom tomorrow. So tune in if you can make it. And yeah, until then, try to find time and space to move outside the mind and into the body and recognize that it really doesn't have to be so serious. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.